In 1983, an experiment was conducted that dared to explore the unthinkable. It wasn't just an attempt to understand the mind, it was a quest to find God. What happened next would terrify even the most devout believers. Welcome to Eerie Road Tales, where we journey into the shadows of humanity's darkest truths and chilling mysteries. Tonight, we uncover the harrowing story of an experiment that pushed the boundaries of human understanding and sanity. Stay with us as we unravel how one man's journey into sensory deprivation led to voices, visions, and a horrifying conclusion that still haunts the world of science. In 1983, in a facility shrouded in secrecy, a group of deeply religious scientists embarked on a controversial and daring experiment. This was no ordinary scientific pursuit. It was a venture into the unknown, a bold attempt to answer one of humanity's most profound questions. They believed that the senses, which tether us to the physical world, obscured a higher truth, a spiritual realm where the divine could be directly perceived. Their theory was radical. If a human could be completely severed from the distractions of sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, the mind might transcend its earthly confines and connect directly with God. The subject of this experiment was an elderly man, a volunteer who had lost all purpose in his life. With no loved ones left and no dreams to pursue, he saw this as an opportunity to find meaning, or perhaps redemption, in his final days. He was not chosen for his physical condition, his intellect, or his spiritual beliefs. He was chosen because he had nothing left to lose. For him, this was not just an experiment. It was a chance to confront the unknown, to find answers in the void. The scientists, driven by an unwavering conviction in their hypothesis, prepared for what would become one of the most extreme and ethically questionable experiments in history. The facility itself mirrored the isolation that the subject was about to endure. Hidden from the public eye, it was an imposing structure, devoid of warmth or humanity. The hallways were narrow and sterile, illuminated by an unrelenting white light that seemed to erase any trace of individuality or emotion. The rooms were cold, clinical, and unwelcoming, a place designed for procedure, not comfort. Inside one such room, the subject lay on a surgical table. The procedure, both groundbreaking and grotesque, would sever every connection between his sensory organs and his brain. It was a delicate operation, performed with a precision that bordered on inhuman. The surgeons worked methodically, disconnecting the pathways that allowed the man to see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. The process was long and grueling, each step taking him further away from the physical world and deeper into isolation. When it was over, the subject was left with no means of perceiving the external world. His body remained functional. He could move, breathe, and even speak, but he was trapped in a void of silence and darkness. The scientists watched with bated breath as their subject was moved into a small, barren room equipped only with the necessary monitors to track his vitals. They were not looking for physical signs. They were waiting for something far more elusive. For the first time in recorded history, a human being was entirely cut off from the senses that define our experience of reality. His world was now one of complete and utter solitude, and his mind was the only link to the unknown. In those first hours, the subject sat in silence, his head tilted slightly as though listening for something that was no longer there. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the soft hum of the machines that monitored him. Days passed, and the subject showed no outward signs of distress. He spoke occasionally, his words slow and disjointed, as though he were struggling to adjust to the absence of the world he once knew. The scientists documented every moment, their anticipation growing with each passing day. What would he find in the silence? Would he achieve the connection they so desperately sought, or would the void prove too much for the human mind to bear? These were the questions that hung heavy in the air as the experiment unfolded. The subject, now severed from every external distraction, was left with nothing but his thoughts, and the team of scientists, watching from the shadows, could only wait for the unknown to reveal itself. The first few days after the procedure were eerily quiet. The subject, seated in the barren room with nothing but his thoughts, occasionally spoke aloud. His words were slow, jumbled, and incoherent, as if he were testing his own voice, though he couldn't hear it. The scientists, observing from behind the reinforced glass, meticulously recorded his behavior. There were no immediate signs of distress, and for a while, it seemed as though the experiment might unfold as planned. On the fourth day, everything changed. The subject, sitting motionless in the center of the room, suddenly tilted his head as though listening to something in the silence. Moments later he spoke again, his voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. He claimed to hear faint voices, distant and unintelligible, murmuring in his mind. At first, the scientists dismissed these claims as the early onset of psychosis, a predictable reaction to total sensory deprivation. After all, the human mind, when isolated, has a tendency to conjure illusions. But something about the way the subject described the voices unsettled even the most skeptical among them. As the hours passed, the voices seemed to grow stronger. The subject's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began talking to the empty room, addressing figures no one else could see. 2 days after his initial claim, he startled the observing team with a chilling revelation. He said, in a trembling voice, that he was speaking to his deceased wife. The clarity with which he described her was haunting. He recounted details about her appearance, her voice, and their life together, details that no one outside his personal life could possibly know. This sudden shift in the experiment sent ripples of unease through the team. The scientists, initially steadfast in their belief that the subject's experiences were mere hallucinations, now found themselves questioning their assumptions. The tension in the observation room was palpable, a mixture of fascination and dread. Some whispered to one another, their skepticism giving way to quiet, growing fear. What happened next deepened their unease. The subject began to address individual scientists directly, his words striking with precision and intimacy. He spoke of their deceased loved ones, spouses, parents, siblings, and shared personal details that were impossible for him to know. One scientist, visibly shaken, was forced to leave the room when the subject recited the exact words of a farewell letter written by his late wife. Others stood frozen, their disbelief crumbling under the weight of the impossible. The atmosphere in the facility shifted drastically. What had begun as a scientific experiment now felt like something far darker, far more uncontrollable. Several members of the team, unable to reconcile what they were witnessing, left the study entirely, their faith in the project shattered. Those who remained were divided. Some clung to the hope that these events were the result of a mind unraveling under extreme conditions, while others began to fear they had unleashed something far beyond their understanding. As the subject continued to speak, the room became a vortex of unease. Every word he uttered seemed to pull the remaining scientists deeper into a web of mystery and terror. The faint voices he had once described were now a chorus, filling his mind and spilling into the sterile silence of the observation chamber. And with each passing moment, the line between reality and the unknown grew thinner, leaving those who watched to wonder, had the experiment breached the veil of death, or was this simply the mind's desperate attempt to survive the void? The voices grew louder. What had started as faint whispers at the edge of his consciousness now turned into a deafening chorus, an unrelenting cacophony of words, cries, and murmurs that filled every moment of the subject's existence. Day after day, the sounds in his mind grew more insistent, more oppressive, until there was no space left for thought, only noise. The scientists, monitoring from the observation room, watched as the man began to visibly unravel. His once calm demeanor gave way to frantic movements and erratic speech, his words alternating between pleas for help and incomprehensible muttering. At first, the subject attempted to engage with the voices, speaking aloud in jumbled sentences. But it was clear that the voices were not speaking to him, they were speaking through him, their messages tangled and cryptic. He would suddenly cry out, addressing figures that no one else could see, describing scenes that no one else could comprehend. He began to pace the room, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, his head jerking as if trying to shake loose the relentless noise inside his mind. Desperation soon overtook him. He begged the scientists for relief, his voice cracking with anguish. "Please," he cried, "make them stop. Just let me sleep." His requests grew more frantic, his words laced with terror. "They won't leave me alone. They're always here. Always talking." The scientists, hesitant to intervene, debated amongst themselves. To sedate him would alter the course of their experiment, but to leave him in this state felt almost cruel. Eventually, they relented, administering a mild sedative to give the subject the reprieve he so desperately sought. For 3 nights, the sedatives offered him some measure of peace. His breathing would slow, his body would relax, and for a few precious hours, he would escape the torment of his waking mind. But even in his sleep, the darkness found him. His dreams became a battleground, vivid and nightmarish. He spoke of being surrounded by the dead, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes fixed on him as they whispered secrets that he refused to repeat. Each morning, he awoke drenched in sweat, his hands trembling as he described the horrors he had seen. By the 4th night, the sedatives were no longer enough. The voices broke through the veil of sleep, dragging him back into their grasp. He awoke screaming, his body convulsing as though he were being physically attacked. He clawed at his skin, his nails raking over his non-functional eyes, leaving deep red marks across his face. "No heaven," he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "No forgiveness." He repeated the phrase over and over, the words spilling from his lips like a mantra, each repetition more chilling than the last. The observation room fell into chaos. The scientists, who had once prided themselves on their objectivity, were now gripped by a growing sense of dread. They watched helplessly as the subject's behavior grew more erratic, more violent. He threw himself against the walls of the chamber, his body slamming into the cold, unyielding surface with a sickening thud. Blood smeared across the walls as he bit into his own flesh, tearing at his arms in a desperate attempt to feel something, anything, that might anchor him to reality. The scene was unbearable, yet the scientists could not look away. They had set this experiment in motion, and now they were witnessing its darkest chapter. The subject's cries filled the room, his voice rising and falling in a harrowing symphony of pain and despair. He begged for death, his words fragmented but clear in their meaning. "End it," he pleaded. "Please, just end it." But the scientists, driven by their belief in the experiment's purpose, refused to intervene. They believed he was close to something profound, something they had spent their careers striving to understand. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. The subject collapsed onto the floor, his body trembling with exhaustion. For hours, he lay motionless, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The scientists dared to hope that the worst had passed, that perhaps he had reached the limits of his suffering and could go no further. But then he stirred. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head and turned it toward the observation window. Though his eyes were non-functional, his gaze felt piercing, as if he could see the scientists staring back at him. The room fell silent as he opened his mouth to speak, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying a weight that froze everyone in place. "I have spoken with God," he said, his words trembling with finality, "and he has abandoned us." The air in the observation room grew heavy, the weight of his statement pressing down on the scientists like an invisible force. No one spoke. No one moved. Moments later, the subject's body went limp, his breathing stopped, and the monitors flatlined. Despite an autopsy, no cause of death could be determined. He had simply stopped. The experiment was over, but its effects lingered like a shadow over those who had witnessed it. Some left the facility, unable to reconcile what they had seen. Others clung to their notes, desperate to find meaning in the chaos. But no one could deny the chilling truth. They had ventured too far, tampered with forces they did not understand, and paid a price they could never have anticipated. If you are thrilled by this story, subscribe to Eerie Road Tales. Here, we dive into the darkest corners of reality, where science, mystery, and horror collide. Don't forget to hit the notification bell, so you never miss a journey into the unknown. And remember, sometimes the answers we seek are far more terrifying than the questions we ask. The end came swiftly and silently. Moments after delivering his chilling final words, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us," the subject's body went still. His breathing ceased, his pulse flatlined, and the monitors tracking his vitals emitted a monotonous tone that seemed to hang in the air, echoing through the sterile observation chamber. The scientists, frozen in place, could only watch as the subject lay lifeless on the cold, sterile floor of the chamber. It was over, though no one truly understood what it was. Efforts to revive the subject proved futile. His body bore no signs of trauma or physical failure. There was no cardiac arrest, no aneurysm, no apparent medical reason for his sudden death. He had simply stopped. His passing defied explanation, leaving even the most experienced medical professionals on the team in a state of disbelief. They performed a thorough autopsy, meticulously examining his body for clues, but found nothing. His organs were intact, his brain showed no anomalies, and there was no indication of internal distress. It was as if the life within him had simply been extinguished, leaving behind an unbroken, yet inexplicably lifeless shell. The aftermath of the experiment was as haunting as the events leading up to it. The facility, once buzzing with the energy of discovery, grew silent. The team of scientists who had once been so united in their belief that they were on the verge of something extraordinary now found themselves divided, burdened by the weight of what they had witnessed. Some left the facility immediately, unable to reconcile their participation in an experiment that had spiraled so far beyond their control. Others stayed, driven by a need to document their findings, to piece together some semblance of understanding from the chaos. But the more they tried to analyze the events, the less sense they seemed to make. The subject's final words haunted them all. "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." What did he mean? Had he truly communicated with a higher power? Was it a figment of his fractured mind, or had the experiment tapped into something beyond human comprehension? The questions piled up, each more unsettling than the last, and none came with answers. In the weeks that followed, the facility was shuttered. Officially, the project was labeled as inconclusive, with all records sealed under layers of bureaucratic red tape. No formal statement was ever made about the experiment's purpose or its outcome, and the remaining scientists were sworn to silence, bound by non-disclosure agreements and the haunting memories of what they had unleashed. Some of them attempted to return to their normal lives, but the experience had left a mark that would never fully fade. Others disappeared entirely, withdrawing from the public eye as if trying to escape the lingering shadows of that fateful experiment. The story of the experiment became a ghost, whispered about in hushed tones among circles of scientists and theorists. Rumors swirled about what had truly happened in that isolated facility. Some claimed it was a tragic failure, a case of scientific hubris that led to the unraveling of a man's mind. Others suggested it was a breakthrough, a forbidden glimpse into realms humanity was never meant to understand. There were even those who believed it to be an outright fabrication, a modern myth born of fear and imagination. Yet, the surviving scientists knew the truth. Whatever it was they had witnessed, it was no myth. Lingering mysteries hung over the entire affair like a dark cloud. What had the subject truly experienced in those final, harrowing days? Were the voices he claimed to hear merely the product of sensory deprivation, or had he somehow opened a channel to another plane of existence? His descriptions of the dead, the vivid details, and the chilling precision with which he recounted personal information about the scientist's loved ones, none of it could be easily dismissed. And then there was his final statement, that cryptic declaration about God's abandonment. Did it reflect a profound spiritual truth, or was it the rambling of a mind broken by isolation and torment? The experiment raised questions that blurred the line between science and the supernatural. What are the limits of human perception? Can the mind, when stripped of all external distractions, reach beyond the veil of reality? Or is such an attempt doomed to drive us into madness? The team had sought answers, but what they found instead was an abyss of uncertainty, one that seemed to grow deeper the more they tried to understand it. Decades later, the story of the experiment persists as a dark legend, whispered among those who dare to probe the boundaries of human knowledge. It serves as both a cautionary tale and a chilling reminder of the risks inherent in the pursuit of ultimate truth. Were the scientists reckless pioneers of forbidden knowledge, or merely victims of their own hubris? And what of the subject himself? Was the subject's final declaration a message meant for humanity, or a delusion born from isolation and suffering? These questions haunted the remaining scientists, driving some to the brink of obsession as they tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. The facility, once a hub of ambition and discovery, became a silent monument to the experiment's failure, or perhaps its success, depending on how one viewed the chilling outcome. Among those who remained, theories began to emerge, each as unsettling as the next. Some believed the experiment had inadvertently opened a gateway to the afterlife, a realm where the living and the dead could communicate. They pointed to the subject's interactions with the deceased, his uncanny knowledge of the scientist's personal lives, and his vivid descriptions of torment and despair. If true, what did it mean that this connection ended with such a horrifying proclamation about divine abandonment? Others theorized that the experiment had merely pushed the human mind beyond its limits. Sensory deprivation, they argued, could create hallucinations so vivid and convincing that the subject might have truly believed he was hearing voices and seeing visions. Yet this explanation failed to account for the precision of the details he shared, facts about the scientist's deceased loved ones that even they struggled to comprehend. There were also whispers of something darker, something far more terrifying. A few suggested that the experiment had drawn the attention of forces beyond human comprehension, entities that thrived in the void the subject had been cast into. Could his final words have been a warning, a revelation of a malevolent presence lurking just beyond the edges of our understanding? These whispers were quickly dismissed by most, but they lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed the experiment firsthand. The subject's death marked the official end of the project, but its legacy continued to ripple through the scientific community. The experiment was never formally published or acknowledged, buried under layers of classified documentation and legal constraints. Yet, the story leaked, spreading like wildfire among those drawn to the mysteries of the human mind and the boundaries of existence. It became a legend, whispered in dark corners of academia and speculative discussions, its details distorted and embellished over time but never losing its chilling core. For the scientists who remained, life after the experiment was a shadow of what it once had been. Many struggled with guilt, unable to reconcile their pursuit of knowledge with the suffering they had caused. Others became reclusive, retreating from public life entirely, their careers derailed by the weight of what they had seen. A few tried to rationalize the events, publishing unrelated papers and continuing their work as if nothing had happened. But those who knew them best could see the haunted look in their eyes, a silent testament to the darkness they had glimpsed. Decades later, the abandoned facility still stands, its halls empty, its rooms stripped of equipment, but its aura unchanged. Some say it's cursed, that those who enter feel an oppressive heaviness, as if the walls themselves remember the horrors they once contained. Others claim to hear whispers in the silence, faint and unintelligible, like echoes of the voices that plagued the subject. Whether these are mere rumors or remnants of something more sinister, no one can say for sure. The experiment serves as a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the risks inherent in pushing the boundaries of human understanding. It asks questions that have no easy answers. What lies beyond our senses? Are we meant to know, or are some truths better left undiscovered? And most chillingly, if there is a higher power, what does it mean for us to be abandoned by it? Perhaps, in the end, the experiment revealed as much about humanity as it did about the subject. Our unyielding curiosity, our willingness to sacrifice, and our fragile grasp on the unknown. It's a story that continues to echo through the ages, a testament to the dangers of delving too deeply into the mysteries of existence. And while the scientists sought to uncover the divine, what they found instead may forever remain one of the darkest mysteries of all. What do you think really happened in that experiment? Was it a glimpse into the divine or a descent into madness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you believe. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another chilling tale from Eerie Road Tales. And remember, some experiments are better left untried. Until next time, tread carefully, because the truth is often darker than you can imagine.